We are on air, which means we got to be up.
Air.
Yes.
Promptly at 7.
Good. Isn't that incredibly coincidental? Fortuitous. All right. Welcome. Sorry for the delay. We're experiencing Hangouts on air. That means you could have stayed home, but you wouldn't have had any pizza or beer.
Always a challenge to get started.
Yes, well, this one in particular, this is the first one we're actually broadcasting. Google Hangouts. And so,
They're not working here.
well, it seems to be, but you know how that goes. It's Google Hangouts on air,
Right.
which means it gets broadcasted and recorded, so hopefully people can't even make it during the time slot.
Are you using the YouTube broadcaster or are you using there's two broadcasters too. There's the standard one and then there's the YouTube one.
It looks like the YouTube one, but I'm not sure. He set it up. I just saw the YouTube thing fly by, so I'm like, it might be that one. Hey, Kristen, can you see it?
Didn't seem to do anything. Like, unless I was supposed to put somewhere I don't know about.
Yes,
Oh, now I see something.
Oh, yay.
Oh yeah, YouTube.
for the risk of actually taking up all the wireless bandwidth you have. Just,
It is.
I'm not sure. They set it up. I just saw the YouTube thing fly by, so I'm like, it might be that one. Kristen, can you see it?
it works.
Looks good too.
Okay, so let me shut this off. So we have to, welcome. Sorry. So let me just make introductions and also make sure we've got video, since you can see it, right? And I can see it. Just want to make sure that everybody else can see it. Now you can put that online. It now shows its background, so you can flip back and forth.
I have no idea how to do that, so.
Well, let me see.
Should be a button beside that pops out.
Yeah.
I can do it not in presentation mode, but
So there's that one.
I went to
And then you just pick that screen too.
okay, perfect.
Okay, so when you put your presentation on to the big screen, when you flip to there, and then bingo. Now that should be, hopefully, I wonder how we
Switch back and forth? Yeah,
yes.
it's not.
Well, I invite anybody who happens to be online, not you, of course. Well, you may be watching it on everybody's doing two things at once anyway, but if anybody's online, please let us know by sending a message, ask a question or a comment. But let me just quickly start. I'm Michael Smith. I'm the host of this particular meeting and the organizer of the Silicon Valley Drupal user group. And we've been having meetings now for 6 months. We got it restarted. It was over at UC Santa Cruz Extension. And GoDaddy was gracious enough to host us. And FFW, formerly known as Pro People, is our sponsor for the food and drink. So we have them today. And this is Amy with Hook 42. We're going to be talking tonight about multilingual, particularly as it relates to Drupal and I'll let her go into the details. But this is a very informative presentation as a result from the DrupalCon. And did anybody get to go to DrupalCon in LA? Yes, well, there were a number of presentations on Drupal 8, and then there was one by Kristen on multilingual. And you did speak to multilingual on Drupal.
Drupal 7 was.
Yes, and I saw her presentation. It was wonderful, and it was amazing that anybody could figure out exactly how to throw all those modules together to get it to work. Because, you know, it was an add-on to Drupal 7. And so, depending on what you want to do, it makes a real interesting mix of modules. But Drupal 8's very different. He's going to talk about that, so I'll let you launch into it. And hopefully, anybody online can join in too. Thank you. Amy.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. This presentation was originally given by Kabor, who is the multilingual initiative leader for Drupal 8. And he has a group of people in the multilingual group come out and present and evangelize all of the wonderful changes with Drupal 8 and multilingual, because it's an amazing change. And this statement really sums it up, that Drupal 8 core is more multilingual than Drupal 7 with all the contrib modules. Oops. And my name is Amy Degnan. I'm CEO of Hook42 and a Drupal architect, and I'm currently writing Drupal 8 multilingual websites book. And my business partner, Kristen, is here, and she's author of the Drupal 7 multilingual website book. And so the original quote comes from Tobias, and he's one of the main core contributors to Drupal 8 multilingual. But it really is going to resonate that really with content plus configuration translation in core, D8 is more translatable than D7 with all of contrib. So first of all, look about multilingual characters and non-ASCII characters in the world. So you can see Gabor has an accent over his A, and you can see in the real world, hey, people get this wrong, and you can see that this, I believe, is also a DrupalCon like tag. So it is actually entertaining. You can see here that the website is saying, oh, we haven't gotten this all the way sorted out here. And also, hey, what happened to that one? That one's a real big change. But you can see that multilingual is a challenge, not just for the web, but for print and everything. It's what to do with all these crazy characters. And my name actually has an accent aigu over the first E. This is really hard to actually fill out any of those like standardized test bubble things with your name with an accent. So I've dropped it for most everything, but this is true. It's difficult in the US, and a lot of people don't know how to deal with these crazy special characters. But it's awesome. Okay, so right now, a little bit of the cool things about Drupal 8, and you can see the fonts are kind of funky, but it's okay. Drupal 8 has wonderful things in core. It has services, it has views, it has inline editing, such as Spark. It's HTML5, so it's very mobile friendly, it's mobile responsive out of the box, and it also has a huge, tons of multilingual support. And that's really what we're going to talk about today. First of all, this is how many people have been contributing to the D8 multilingual initiative. There's a lot of people here, and it's over 1,000 plus contributors at this point. And you can see that people are very active in the multilingual Sprint community. You have a lot of people. There's a multilingual shirt there. So to the question for folks this earlier is, hey, is that the multilingual logo? Yeah, it is. It's fun. And so you have a lot of contributors from around the world making sure that Drupal 8 multilingual is incredibly strong. Because honestly, Drupal 7 multilingual was a big challenge. It still is. So Drupal 7 multilingual, it starts off with Drupal core, and then you have the locale module. And that comes in core. But you can't do translation and everything with Locale. Locale just says, I'm going to support more languages. So you have to say, oh, I need to add another chunk of modules, like the localization update, to get all the string translations from localize.drupal.org. Oh, and now I want to translate content. So I have to set up either a node-based, like content translation, which is a node copy, or an entity translation, which is interesting. And that's, watch Kristen's demonstration about multilingual module madness from DrupalCon. You'll get a nice big overview of Drupal 7 multilingual. But then you also have to install a suite of modules from the internationalization modules. There's a lot of submodules with this that add support for like translating content and taxonomies and all sorts of other things. And then you have to install like the variable translation modules and the entity translation if you're going to do entity-based translation. And whoops, sorry guys, jumpy. But the end result is you have to end up installing over 20 plus modules just to get a basic Drupal 7 multilingual site up and running. And that's not even if you have to support multilingual with like Apache Solr or any other integrations to things. There's a lot of stuff going on. And what that does is it gives you a lot of bloat, and it gives a lot of complexity around the modules. But the cool thing in Drupal 8 is that Drupal 8 takes a language-first approach. So, and it's very simple. First of all, it starts out with language as the base services for all modules and core. Everything is language aware. So instead of like in Drupal 7, multilingual was kind of a bolt-on, well, when you have other modules that are created, some people didn't take into account, hey, how do I actually support multilingual with it? But with Drupal 8, everything is language aware. So by default, you jump in, and if you're extending your site with modules, it gives you a very good start for language aware coding. And also, it has the interface translation. It has a built-in update feature, so instead of adding new modules to update localization, it's all built in. And it also has a ton of improved usability on the UI, and we'll take a look about that. And content. So field translation is built in the API for content. Does anybody know what the difference between field translation and content translation is? Do you guys want me to cover that? Yes? Or, oh, you guys know. Okay, so very quickly, content translation, starting from Drupal 6 and carry over to Drupal 7, is you copy a node, and then the two nodes are related with each other with a translation set. And then entity translation is you have one node that has all the different translations for all the fields that you configure in that one node. So you have one node ID, all the languages, versus multiple node IDs, one for each represented translation. But in Drupal 8, that field translation is all built in, and it makes it much easier to configure. Then also the config translation, the configurations system handles a lot of blocks, views, field settings, and a unified translation mechanism. So you have language as the base for everything involved with Drupal 8. You have the interface translation, content translation, and config translation. Oops. All right, we're going to start off with language as the base services for Drupal 8. And it does everything dealing with data. It's not just multilingual, so everything is language aware. And the coolest thing here, and one of the hardest things about multilingual Drupal adaptation, was it's really hard to get from the English version to a native language version. So trying to install those 30 plus modules on Drupal 7 in English when English is not your first language is pretty difficult. So right off the bat, you can choose your native language on the install, and it will start installing with that native language. So instantly, all of the interface will already start looking like it's in the native language. So it's going to make the user adaptation to Drupal 8 that much easier. And then we go through language assignment. And so you can assign languages to nodes, to aliases, and users, and terms, and views, and site info. So we can do language assignment to everything. This gives you a very flexible system to target your multilingual content as you need to for your business. And there's some information, like the language selector is not always exposed for your site information. There's a few considerations as you go through Drupal 8. And then that is a broken font set. So here, let me go through. It's just taking a little bit of a delay on this presentation, so hold on one second. Okay. But what's really amazing about Drupal 8 is there's a very flexible setup. So right now what you see is your first regional language screen. So this is where you set your default settings like, hey, I'm in the US, I use my date and time formats, and so you can see the languages right at the bottom, and then you see the content language at the bottom. We also have a wonderful set of language visibility. So basically, by language, blocks can show hide based on languages. That's all built in. The views already has language filtering features. So right now, if you're doing views on a multilingual site, you have to add extra contrib modules to support that and enable things. And then Drupal built-in pages are also converted to views now. So what's really cool about having Drupal 8 and views in Drupal core, that everything like your front page node river, all of the different admin screens, they're all views. So you have, it's like installing admin views modules. You've got a lot of flexibility in customizing your pages. All right, and first of all, like Drupal 7, Drupal 8 has a nice language selection area, and this is where you can support your a domain prefix or just a language prefix at the end. Also, there's a little bit more detection methods. Right here, it's very common to use the URL detection method, but there's also some different detection methods to support admin language features. So what you can do is you can have a user who's a systems administrator or a Drupal administrator have their admin language set up to be English, but then support a multilingual site and still be able to read what their interface is doing. So that's out of the box. That's on Drupal core. And so you can see here, we have URL. You have also, and that's enabled by default. And you have session. Here's your path prefix settings. What's nice also here is you can change your English default domain. And you can go ahead and there's a session one, so you can say, hey, what is this user doing? There's user language preferences. Also, you can do browser detection, so you can automatically send these out. Now, these are very interesting here. So this uses the browser detection by using the locale in the browser, and you can see we can also add a new mapping. So we can add custom language routing. And if you end up using a very industry standard browser code, then you can map that to whatever language that you need. And then here's your account administration pages here, and then also the selected language. So at the core, you can choose what your site's default language is on the display. This is the right place to actually change the site's default language. You can change default language on a different part of the configuration, but that's not where you want to do it. This manages the display area, not like the core structure of your selected language or the default language. And default language is a big deal to set in Drupal. So you don't want to change that very much because there's like a butterfly effect of all of the things that break if the default language is changed. But this, you're allowed to actually switch what it thinks it's the default language. What's really cool is that name, the transliteration is in here. And transliteration is the act of changing any non-ASCII characters to ASCII characters. So basically these machine names, because like Drupal code doesn't like to have accents in its machine name. So basically you can see here some Russian, some Staria, but you can, it automatically is involved in core. In Drupal 7, you have to actually install another module to get this support. What's really nice with this is by default, you don't have to add these different things to it. What is that sound? Oh, I saw. Wow. Oh, I wanted to get all like, whoa, reverb. Okay. The coolest thing about Drupal 8 is that English can be deleted. Okay, so it doesn't make a big deal in like the US here, but what's really important is if you have like an Italian-only site, why do you want to have English supported? It just adds more overhead, that type of thing. So what's wonderful is you can install your site in Italian and you can delete English. So by default, Drupal core's code is in English. So if there's not strings translated from the modules, you're going to see some English on the site. But English itself as a language can be deleted. So you can just have one language if you need to. And that's cool. That makes it way easier to manage. Okay, so just to recap the base pillar, you can delete English. You have a flexible selection of different languages. You can have custom languages. It's integrated heavily with block visibility and views. You have a very flexible configuration. You can even set up Elvish if you wanted to. It's awesome. And I have. It's fun. And then you have a wider assignment of language on different types of things. And then it's first in the installer to make it easier to use. Oops. Okay, so about interface translation. So interface translation is all the stuff that's not content, right? So it is all the supporting things like login, sign in, that type of thing. So let's go over that. First of all, out of core, there's an automated translation, downloads, and updates from Drupal core, from localize.drupal.org. So that's in by default, and you can configure that in a lot of flexible ways. So you can pull that down into a pre-production environment to get the localization strings, and then they go into a centralized translation file location, which is cool because you can check that into a Git repo and then deploy that out into multiple environments. What that means is you can actually do pre-testing on translation before you go live. So often, sometimes you can say, uh-oh, I have to update my live server, and you have to press the button, and you go like that and see, oh, is it going to break? But that's not the case for Drupal 8. It's very centralized, one location. It's great. And then you have customization tracking. So basically, when you make translations, you can overwrite the translations that come from Drupal.org. You can create your own custom translations, and you can be protected from community overwrites. So when you do your updates, you can say, please use my customizations, don't replace them with anything that the community has done. So it's cool. And also the import won't time out on big things. It's using the batch process to really make sure that things don't time out on the big localization updates. And there's this wonderful whole new interface for actually doing the string translation. So it still is, the search is case sensitive still. But what's really cool is that you can see all of the different singulars and plurals together, so you can quickly translate those. You see one language at a time. But this is wonderful. It makes it a lot easier instead of having to research everything. But the interface does only support one language at a time. But you can search in only translated strings. You can do the customized translation or your standard translation, which is something you got from Drupal.org. So much more flexibility in searching and filtering here. And of course, this is all still like an admin view, so you can even extend this if you wanted to. All right, now the coolest thing, how many times have you been asked to change like login or register to a different string? Maybe have like in English, maybe just like sign on up and this is cool, just do it, something like that. Previously in Drupal 7, you had to install string overrides or do it with code. Right now, this is where you get to actually translate English. So the act of doing that string override is the act of translating English. Let's see. So basically, but you have to tell Drupal that you want it translated. So see, the interface translation doesn't exist until you actually enable interface translation to English. So once you say, hey, I want to do this, it's available. But there are some performance overheads with this because it's like one more processing on each one of the, one more level of processing. But see, here's login changes to sign in. And that is as easy as it is to override Drupal's core strings. So that in itself is awesome. And so you can see here, the user login is now changed to sign in on the button. So that's amazing. And we haven't gotten any module overhead because we haven't added any new modules. It's still in core. All right, so we can translate to English. There's a whole new interface. The custom translations are tracked and you can export and import them. You have a centralized file directory that you can deploy through like a managed workflow process. You have auto download of updates, and it's also, you can be kept in a separate module. Okay, yeah, the fonts are a little funky on this. I think anyway, the content translation piece, so basically field translation is the new language on how we're calling like translation in Drupal 8. So field translation has a built-in API for all entities. So it's not just a content, not just a node, it's for all entities, so custom entities, everything. And then content translation module provides the user interface. So all content entities are supported. And what is a content entity? So content is nodes, users, comments, terms, contact messages, menu items. Those types of things are content entities. So those are all by default in Drupal 8's support. And then it's a nice integrated configuration. So if we take a look here, you have this wonderful page called Content, Language, and Translation. At the very top there, when you first come to the page, you just have a little few blocks. But then when you click on them, you open up like, hey, this is what the content type is. And you can see how quickly you can enable translation on each field. And if anybody has ever created multilingual on Drupal 7, so many clicks, you have to like ice your wrist, and like there's 3 or 5 different clicks for each field. And did you miss a field? And how do you know? So it's all on one page. It's one place. It's very easy. You can change the default message. You can enable the language selector. It's on one page. It's on one page. And what's interesting is as there's only 4 modules instead of like the umpteen modules for Drupal 7. So there's only 4 modules that are required to actually give you all this support. And as you enable the different modules, you can see how this page changes over time, because the more language support you have, the more translation support you have, it will start surfacing more selections on that page. And so for the translation interface, yeah, the fonts are all entertaining. So on the translation interface, everything has a translation tab. So you can see it's now called Translate. This is, the strings have changed. This is an earlier kind of screen grab. But you can easily add translations for each language. it's actually, you can take a different source language. So in Drupal 7, by default, it kind of forces you to take like the same source language, which sometimes it's not very flexible. So this one you can say, oh, hey, I've got 5 languages on my site. I want to translate from Spanish to French instead of always just going to English to French. So it's really flexible. And you can edit the all language values with very specific permissions. So if you have a field that's like an image that is shared over all the different languages, you can actually have different permissions on that field to do that. And what's really interesting is the translation interface is similar for every single content, every single entity type. So it looks the same and similar for taxonomies, for blocks, for content, it's everything. So it's easy to train people that are on the translation team to actually do this work. See, and we have a translate tab. You can very quickly see what the translation is. You can quickly edit it, and you have a nice view of what that status is at any point. And here you can see that the contents here, like content types in Drupal 8, you have, normally, you know, in Drupal 7, you have those vertical tabs at the bottom of the page. You have them to the right, so you can quickly get to some of those translation information. And then let's go through, okay, and then that's all that's in there. So property translation is in the works, and this is an older demo. Property translation is taken care of, so this is like your titles and everything, like block titles. A property is like your node title. So these are things that aren't necessarily content. They're not necessarily variables. They're Drupal properties. Now, what's interesting is Drupal 8 doesn't actually use an upgrade path. It's an export. It's a migration path. So you can't just put Drupal 8 on your Drupal 7 site and go upgrade. There's too much differences going on there. So what it does is have a migration path. And you know, they've been making great progress on the migration. I believe that Drupal 6 migration path is taken care of, and they're working on the Drupal 7 one right now. They meaning the Drupal core migrate team. And what's really awesome is the core search and API has language support. Language search has always been a challenge. So this is like leaps and bounds above like the Drupal 7 setup. Also, Node Access API has language support, so quickly you can integrate your custom modules with Node Access. And it's really quite nice. So just to recap, Node Access is supported. The search index is separate. Search APIs have been updated to support language for all content entities. And then what's interesting is you can have language settings per bundle, per field, per subfield. Properties need to be updated, and then it's a migration path, not an upgrade path. All right. Okay, that was config. So we'll go on config versus content. If we come back to our ball of entity here, our content here was nodes, users, comments, terms, but configuration is views, vocabularies, contact categories, and fields. And do I need to go in through the big, deep difference between the two, or you guys get the swag? Okay, great. And then there's like these other things like path, aliases, and stuff like that, that they're still even working out to this day. And menu items versus menus itself. Well, menu items is content, but they're still working through menu translation at this point. So, but what's interesting and wonderful is language is tracked on each configuration file. So you can have languages. Well, let me get into this one. And then language overrides or stored with your configuration. So this all comes down. Are you guys familiar with the Drupal 8 Configuration Management Initiative? CMI is what it's called lately. Okay, so basically, as you do your configuration management, all of the language settings are attached to that kind of bundle of configuration code that you can check in and deploy across different servers. So all the language overrides, they're all stored with that configuration. And then you can see on the ship configuration, we've got a title. We have user interface translation here. We're going to change the string to blah, 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 blah. I cannot speak that language. But what's wonderful is this configuration can be exported into your configuration translation files, and it gets deployed out through the CMI type of workflow. It's nice. And then there's still some integration to-dos for localize D.O. When I was in Amsterdam and we did the beta launch, that's when we pressed the button to update like localize.d.o to pull down some of the strings, but it's still an effort to keep that going. So like they're taking a lot of the strings from Drupal 7 that they can still leverage and pulling them down, but there's a lot of effort that needs to be done on the translation side of Drupal 8. And then what's cool is for any of the configurations, like we were talking about, all of these different configurations can be overridden. So you can see here the language switcher has a different language, and all of this can be stored and exported for deployment. And here's your site information. This is all embedded. You can just translate the site system information, quickly change the site name, quickly change the slogan. All of these things are by default instead of having to add extra modules to the site. And so you can see the site name has changed. Sweet. Okay, so covering config, we have a full translation module enabled. We have the standard translation tabs available on almost everything. We have configuration overrides. It works for any of the configs, and the ship config is translated. And just to cover this one more time, Drupal 8 is built with using a language-first approach. So instead of fighting Drupal 7's kind of built-on, add-on, this module isn't built for multilingual, everything in Drupal 8 is going to be geared to support language. It's got a beautiful interface translation and lots more tools, and it's a lot easier to use for everybody involved. The content translation is by far much easier to manage. Also, we didn't talk about that here, but the most interesting thing with Drupal 8, it has a wonderful language fallback system. So what you can do is you can say, oh, if French, Canadian French doesn't exist, fall back to French, or you can set up any type of fallback. And this one isn't covered, but it's extremely flexible. And then the config translation. So it's a centralized common configuration system that handles blocks and views and anything that you need to actually give you a very comprehensive interface translation. So are you guys interested in helping with the multilingual initiative? If so, Gabor has a wonderful website. He's updating it all the time with new improvements of what's Drupal 8's going on, what big issues are there that's blocking any RC1. Also, we're going to be in New York, and we're going to have a big sprint there. So New York camp. Is anybody going to NICE camp? Oh, cool. Do you want to sprint with us with multilingual?
We'll see.
Let's talk after this. That's awesome because we're putting together the multilingual sprint there, so it'd be really lovely. And really there's a multilingual meeting every Wednesday in IRC. So a lot of the team talks about pressing issues and does a lot of worldwide coordination there. So, okay, let's see. I don't know how to.
Do you have anybody online?
No, I don't think so.
Well,
But it's recorded and it's beautiful.
well, we can run it, and what I'll do is I'll switch sharing off. I can find it here. Where was it? You can see where. There we go. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll just pull this over here.
Oh.
And then anybody who's online, or actually anybody who happens to get online later, this will be on YouTube. Can Sweet take questions now?
Yeah, do you guys have any questions?
So with the language stuff, can you do theme and page reflow, or is there any way of tying that into a theme? So for example, if I have a language that goes left, right versus right, left, or it says right to left, and I want to reflow my theme, my page, can I tie that to the language?
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah. There's a configuration there that just says right to left.
Well, no, but not just that. I'm changing the CSS. I'm changing
Yes.
the full deeper part of the thing.
So, and I don't think it's changed that much from Drupal 7. You just typically have a separate CSS file.
Yeah.
For the regular language.
Yeah, so I can do that.
Yeah, the language is aware what direction it goes, and you can key off of that for whatever the configuration is needed. Yeah. And then I believe that this is where you can have separate block settings for each one of the languages as well, so you can end up.
Right.
Yeah.
I might have different graphics. I might
Absolutely.
have different colors and all that stuff.
Yeah. Any other questions? Wow, quiet. Do you have questions about Drupal 7 multilingual? Like. That's a wonderful question. So it's why it's, you know what, it's Wednesday in the evening.
TMGMT.
Yeah, yeah. So there that is contrib still. So there is movement on that, and Lingotech has been a huge contributor to some of their Lingotech translation modules. So they've been on the forefront of the Drupal 8 multilingual side of things since the very beginning. And so I know that they're already heavily working on translation management tools that go into their service. I don't know if you've seen any other updates. I haven't looked specifically for that topic and keeping the pulse on it, but when we were in DrupalCon LA, Schnitzel was still working on it, so yeah. So it's, right, yeah. Okay, any other questions? Yeah, go for it.
So when you updated the login to sign in button, I didn't see a tab there that said if you go to sign in, so you changed it, right?
Uh-huh.
It's going to save the login and all translations for that. It's going to generate a new translation string for sign in.
Yeah.
That you're going to go to some magic place to.
Oh, here, let me walk through that. Okay, so if we're going to translate English, what it does is and you export the configuration, it stores English in its own language file. Like, so the way that you export language configurations for the different languages, it goes into the configuration management. It goes into the file system. And so English then, instead of just reading from the DB, goes into that file system. It gets read up as well, but that's where it lives. And that's how you can change it and then deploy it up through the different environments. Does that?
We can translate that out. You change the string in the interface.
Oh, translating that to another language? Yeah, the root string is still English because it's like you're translating something that's out of core, right? So core, because core is coded in English by default, you're going to translate that out to a different language. So if you wanted to change login to sign in, you still have to translate login to the equivalent sign in like French or German. Does that answer your question?
It's actually the same interface, it's just you can only do one language at a time. So when
Are you gonna go somewhere and you're gonna search for sign in? Or are you
No,
gonna go
you
somewhere
search
and you're
for
gonna search for
login.
login?
You search for login.
search for login. So that
You
is
gotta
something-
remember every string that you decided to custom change,
Yeah.
right?
Well, what's interesting is you can export all of the strings in like PO files. And so you can export those and you can choose the export of like custom strings only. So you can export what you know that's been customized. So that will help streamline that. Yeah, it sounds
At
like
least gives you a bone
Yeah.
to chase.
exactly. And what I'm going to share with you guys here, there it is. Okay. So what's really cool is as we are working through saying how much cool things can you do in Drupal core, we do a Drupal 8 hands-on lab where you can actually use Drupal 8's translation tools to build out every type of entity and content that's in Drupal 8. And what we have, if you go to like Drupal, the multilingual demo on Drupal, on DrupalCon, sorry, wow, it's so Wednesday night. Multilingual demo, this is a fully baked install profile that gives an example of multiple languages, blocks, menus, views, everything is translated. And you can take a quick look at that at Simply Test Me. So you can go there, it auto-populates. Sorry, this isn't my computer, so it's a little, here you go. So it'll download the project, and it's an installation profile. So you just have to choose the installation profile when we start. And then you can see there's some pre-baked content with translations. There's view for a home page. And there's a lot of interesting things. Like there's a lot of different types of menus. There's like a classic menu item, like, hey, go to the menu and add one. There is a views page that makes a menu item, and then there's also like system page menu items. So here we're gonna choose language. I'll choose English. And we're just gonna choose the defaults. Has everybody used Simply Test Me before? It's awesome. Okay, so we're installing the multilingual demo, and what this does is it actually has some pre-baked translation files in there too. So it puts content in and it preloads it. Google translated content. So it's not great, but it's absolutely representative of translated language. But don't judge us on the translation. Yeah, so we're updating the translations here. And you can see all of the translations are coming down from not only our configured like content, but it's also coming down from, if we had chosen a different language, it would have come down from the localized.drupal.org. All right. Here's updating configuration translations. I see an error, so we can, oh, it's that HTML thing. Okay, so great. Here you go. Quickly, you can see how to work with Drupal 8 multilingual. It's even, so no judgment on the very quick responsive, but we're trying to use everything we could out of core. So you can say, oh, I can make a site out of core, but you can see I can have my language switcher here. We have blocks that are, this is a view, this is a home page view. This is a very specific view for trips. This is a content page, just a regular like about us. And then here you can see the contact form page. So you can, all of these are samples of different configuration, content, and interface translation.
We need to translate the contact.
Yeah, there's a few things like, yeah, we have to change the DrupalCon Amsterdam. Oh, Gabor took it out? Okay. So anyway, here's us debugging our multilingual demo as we show it, but it's really cool. Like, so we have a Drupal 8 multilingual hands-on demo, and I'll give you the links to put up on the Silicon Valley Drupal user groups, because we have a full like Google Doc that you can sit there and go through all the steps and go on Simply Test Me or download Drupal 8 by yourself and go through all of the configuration for multilingual. So we do this at many camps. So we share the assets, so you can go through the handout, and you'll be able to recreate something very similar to this site by yourself and use this site for reference. So, okay. Any other questions? You guys want me to show anything? Yeah, go ahead.
When you're dealing with themes, if you're starting just from scratch, which themes would you suggest as being the most friendly for international edition and localization?
Drupal 8?
In Drupal 7 specifically is what I was thinking.
Oh.
Or are they all just take what you get?
So, Drupal 7 was the name?
Yeah.
Drupal 7 multilingual theme.
Nothing specific stands out as being more friendly than any of the others?
No.
No.
Nothing like that.
I mean, we did a multilingual site on the Stanford Open Framework theme, and that was fine. But that's using Bootstrap 2, I believe. So you just have to see which framework you're using. But mostly those things just layer on top of the multilingual foundation. It's just a display. So it's like, specifically, you have to see what Drupal things at the theme layer are doing any magic mojo. But mostly you're going to have to do, you're either going to have to do some heavy site building with the Drupal 7 plus whatever theme configuration.
Yeah, I mean, the only
Like-
theme stuff that you might have to think about would be if for some reason the theme has a lot of custom text in it.
Yeah.
Isn't usually the case, but just make sure that they're using T functions for that so that you can translate it.
Yeah.
And then the only thing would be the RTL stuff, and then so actually, I mean, a good way to tell is download it and see if they have any RTL files for the CSS, and then they're probably more likely to know what's going on.
Yeah, and that addresses like the right to left question too. It's even like the language will have, hey, do I know if I'm right to left? But does the theme actually do anything with it is a completely different question. So it's the best test is to download it and take a look at it. So yeah, hi there.
So you mentioned that in 8 you're going to have a relatively graceful language fallback.
Right.
So for your example of the French Canadian fallback in French. In 7, we played around with a couple of different approaches to that. But do you have any advice on what's a best thing to use for the fallback? So,
Wow. Okay, so language fallback, regardless of which version, is you have to flexibility and complexity causes lots of QA oddities. So if you have a fallback language strategy, it's to keep it as simple and elegant as possible and predictable. And in Drupal 8, one of the craziest things is it does get very flexible. You can have fallback all the way down like on a field-based type of thing. So if you put fields and blocks and everything all together and you mash it all up, if you're not careful, you're going to have some weird stuff happening on your site, and it's going to be very hard to debug. So even with Drupal 7, because there's like the additive modules that you can do the language fallback and stuff like that, whatever you do is just take a very clearly defined approach with it, and don't get too crazy with all of like the different views. I mean, it's basically keep it as straightforward as possible so you can actually test it. Because that's the worst part of it, is not having like a predictable interface, because often your translators aren't going to be like crazily technical. So you want to make sure that you go, oh, you translate that and it shows up over here? Yes, cool. And it sounds like incredibly simple to say that, but if we don't remember that, we all do this. It's like, oh, I'm going to make some crazy, like awesome fallback mechanism. It's going to be fun. But what happens is it gets too convoluted. So cool. Silence.
Okay.
Okay.
Excellent. Cool.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Like the-
I don't know how to turn this off, so
Oh,
I'm going to
that's
let
okay.
you turn that off.
We'll let it run on until the battery in that camera's about to die anyway, so it doesn't really matter, does it?
I could have probably flown through the hands-on really quickly. Yeah. I know. We'll give you guys the homework if you want to play with the.
I could hear this.
If you want to play with setting it up yourself, it's just a big Google Doc. Start from the top.
You're gonna add the links right to the.
The SV Doc, yeah. Well, I'll make sure. Like, we've reiterated on this since pre-beta, so alpha, blah 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 blah. So what we do is I just revisit the handout and just make sure it's updated, because like, hey, whoops, the taxonomy field, it's not text, it's not a term anymore, it's an entity. So little things like that change, and like beta 10, it's different, so we had to go and update the documentation. So I'll take a check and see if it's all okay, and I'll put it on the site.
Have you noticed any oddities with more complex data types? You know, like an example was, I was working with this one, like you have like songs and then you have an album, and the album is a song, both of them two different content types.
Okay, so I'm going to reiterate that. So the complex data type, there are a few things that can make a complex data type. So yeah, you have maybe a content type called album, and you have a content type named song, or you have like a field collection named song, and it has all these different things, or you have a custom entity called song. And so these, yes, there's always issues with those, because this is the nature of Drupal 7 as these add-ons, like field collection and field collection with like no translation and field collection with field translation. There's all sorts of layers of the complexity of setting up translation, because is the field collection translated, or is it the field in the collection that's translated? And then blah, 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 blah. And then, oh, if I'm going to relate if I'm relating the content to the album, is the relationship translated, or is it the content itself? So that's the tricky part of any of the translation, even for Drupal 7 or Drupal 8, is knowing when to choose the configuration of, is it translated or not? Because often you're like, hey, I have an album, I have like the Chipmunks Christmas album, and in English, and that is a content type, and it has songs. I don't want to translate the relationship, because the relationship is always going to be the same. I have the Christmas song, on that album, so that relationship you don't translate, but you translate the fields within that song to be in multiple languages, and you translate the fields that are in the album so it's translated, but that relationship stays the same, because you're like, oh, I'm pointing to this one thing. If you're using field-based translation.
Right. But then you could have a different content model depending on other types of relationships where it does make sense to actually translate the
relationship,
the field that's pointing out to a different, node or other entity.
Right, and like a perfect example for that is if you have a product that is has different colors for different countries. So if my Nike shoes, these ones are only black and gray in the US, then the colors are black and gray in the US. But in Canada, they're like purple and green. That color field needs, or if it's a taxonomy term or whatever, that is translatable, because, oh, that content changes per locale or language or whatever. And that's a very simplistic thing. You might not want to do that for products or whatever, but that's a use case for having tags translated.
I was looking at a page today that had one of those complex structures displayed, and the message said English translation not available.
English translation not available.
Yes.
That's interesting. In Drupal
Mhm.
7? That would be interesting to look at.
So maybe they set their
Something was-
Default language
to
is
something
different.
else.
Like generic languages or whatever, natural ones, or, and then one piece of content in that structure got adjusted or translated, and then the rest of it isn't.
So in the
It's throwing a message regarding the
Well, I
structure
mean, if
saying,
the source content wasn't English, I mean, you could create your source node and
well,
I
that
mean, I don't know
happens.
if you're doing.
exactly,
That happens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then source content node is disassociated from the rest of the translation.
Yep.
Before, and then you have this English piece lost, and you're never able to get back to it. You have to really go up and find where you went.
can I make a funny lost in translation joke? Because that was awesome. Sorry. Yeah, sorry, put up tip your waitress for every Wednesday. Yeah, that's interesting. And what happens, and this is called the bolt-on, this is like the bolt-on like symptoms of Drupal 7 is like, especially if you're doing these content or these complex data types, that sometimes they don't get the language written to the field in the database. So it's like und, right? And sometimes that loses it. Yeah, you lose that translation set mapping if you're doing content translation. Yeah, it's weird. And I think that it happens. And it happen, and there's so many modules in the world and so many ways to make data types and relationships in Drupal that it's almost like on a use case, for instance, like, okay, well, here we go, let's research that, you know? And
Yeah. So like field collections is a nightmare. So
Yeah.
if you're doing that in Drupal 7, it's just not fun at all. So I had to do that and just write a bunch of custom stuff to try to just let it hobble along.
We write a lot of custom stuff as far as content translation, using community references.
yes,
Translating an English page to Spanish, and you need to step down to every piece of child content, make sure you set up the Spanish content for those, relating them to the Spanish.
Yeah. and like we had done a Chinese translated site very early with field collections, and we had to end up doing a similar thing. It's like, oh, hey, I need to recreate all of one of you.
Yeah, they recreate every single set piece of data.
Exactly, and it's interesting. But that's why Drupal 8 is so cool, is because with language on everything, it forces all the people making modules to actually be super language aware. And so we don't have to like bolt on. It's all of these symptoms that we're all hurting from. Are hopefully proactively addressed.
And the module writers shouldn't actually have to even think particularly about it because it's just there, and as long as you're doing best practices, then just magically happens.
Yeah, it's all in the APIs and everything, so it's really quite lovely.
Is there a way to teach people how to speak English?
Drupal, how to speak English?
Yeah, it uses it, but it doesn't, as you said, the UND isn't.
Oh, that's a language undefined, and what's interesting in Drupal 8, there are special languages, and you can create your own special language. And there's a couple of special languages. Is you can set up something that you know is never going to have a language, or you can set up something that you know is going to have a language at some point, but you don't know what that is yet. And that structure is set up for like migration and content migration, population, and that type of thing. So that's not necessarily like, yeah, I don't have anything up there, but there are languages available, and if you needed to set up your own special language, you can do that. So that's different than making a custom language called Elvish, but you can, but kind of similar. So anyway, yeah. Any other questions? Go for it.
In Drupal 7, I was able to synchronize field translations. Similar in Drupal 8.
Right, so you don't really need it.
You don't need it
because
anymore.
if you don't make it translatable, there's only one entity.
Okay, it's used for
Right, so that whole having two of them aligned doesn't come into play anymore. So, I mean, you can flag things as out of date if you need to still, which is different, but you don't have to synchronize the fields anymore. That is another symptom of like patching it all together. It's It's like, oh, please, like tape, duct tape. Please synchronize my translation. So yeah, it's exciting. Thank you guys for coming. There's a lot of people, it seems, interested in multilingual, which is awesome. Sweet.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
And I'd like to thank all of you for coming. I'd like to thank Chris and her daddy for hosting us. And of course, does anybody know what this stands for?
No, we were all wondering in LA, like, what's
Yeah, I talked to Michael Drager about that. And he had some interesting comments, but nothing I could repeat.
Yeah, exactly.
So, but they're now, I think, probably the biggest agency, at least in North America. Maybe not in the world. It's hard to say. Yeah, and we're very happy that they're providing us libations. So, any other questions about Meetup? How many here first time to Silicon Valley? Okay, great. Well, this month marks the 7th anniversary of Silicon Valley Drupal Meetup. It started in 2008, and it was off again, on again. I know Bill Passman did it for a while. And I believe you presented in Palo Alto.
Yeah, we were at Apogee. Remember, that was right when we started the company. Yeah, you're in Apogee.
Yeah, so we're trying to keep it going, so we do appreciate your patronage. And if there's anything we can do, please let me know, because I'd like to, create a little momentum here. I realize sometimes it's hard to get here. I've gotten that comment numerous times. And in fact, I was down at DrupalCon and the community forums, and there were several people, one from Los Angeles in particular, who had the same comment, particularly the guy from LA. He said, everywhere is a long way from here. And they have a huge membership down there, and they'll sometimes only see 3 or 4 people simply because the commute will just be murdered. So if there's anything we can do, that's why we're doing Google Hangouts on air, so that people can actually, from their desk, join the meetup without having to make the commute. And of course, they can also see it after the fact, in case they just want to catch up. Yes?
Yeah, and if you're not driving or you have the option, public transit actually works really well for this location. 2 BTA stops literally at the corner of the property. So you can do BTA or Caltrain BTA. It's pretty straightforward.
Yes, it's as convenient as you can get in Silicon Valley. And that's saying a lot, actually.
Yeah, no kidding.
Here. So, but feel free to get some more food and drink. Once again, we appreciate your coming. Yes.
I know up in Sacramento, I'm up there in general, that we do a second meeting during the month where it's just users helping users. Are you guys, has there been any thought about doing that? Are you guys doing that and I just hadn't seen it? Or
Mark does that up at the San Francisco.
Yeah, I've seen it at the San Francisco one.
Yes. In fact, what I did for this particular meetup is I contacted the Sacramento Drupal meetup group, and they're having a meetup tonight at 7 o'clock.
They're Wednesdays night, yeah.
And I said, if you wanted to take the feed and bring it in, because they didn't have a specific agenda.
Okay, cool.
But yes, I think that's a good idea. And I think the way that would work is if we had it online, that way people who are maybe actually desperately working late one night and trying to figure out something could join the Hangout and say, how do I fix this problem?
I think that'd be a great venue, yeah, definitely.
Okay, well, we'll work on that then, and perhaps turn a portion of this meetup into that. Because we've done a lot of presentations, and we've spent a lot of time answering questions, but we really haven't had an opportunity to do like lightning talks,
right,
or users helping users.
And another thing that they do up in the city is daytime Drupal. So it's the folks that have like family or kids at home, and they have enough time during the day for their employers to let them out and meet within working hours. And that's been pretty helpful. It's heavily used in the government sector area. And they have some traction there. It's not a huge group, but it's big enough to like talk with folks and have a community to help. And that's been interesting. I don't know how often they're doing it, so you'd have to check the meetups and stuff. But it's another option for heavy traffic days to have like a daytime Drupal. somewhere in Silicon Valley.
Yes.
Yeah, in Santa Cruz, we have a monthly one, and it's at night. It's at 7 o'clock as well. And there are just people that they want a daytime one. Me personally, I prefer to have it at night because I don't want to be distracted when I'm working. I like to focus on my work and not get thrown out of my zone. But yeah, so there seems to be two camps: the ones that want to do like a brown bag, and then the ones that would rather do it at night. It's hard to balance that.
Yes. And so maybe doing it online. In fact, we've had people come to this meetup, show up at 8 o'clock or 8:15, and it was because they couldn't get out of work. And so finding the right time is probably the hardest part of all of this. But doing it online might solve that problem for a lot of people.
Definitely help.
Okay, great.
And that's another thing that we've done also up in Sacramento was focus on getting people sprinting, an intro to sprint. So if you've never done it before and you want to do that, having a lot of the effort that goes into it is getting people set up. And so that's one thing that we've done up there is that we've set up, hey, we're going to do an intro to sprinting. Let's go ahead and get everybody so that they're set up and ready so that now when there is a sprint happening, like on the global education days when everybody's doing sprints together, you can have a pre-meeting before that to get people ready so that they can join.
Oh, that's great.
We also might want to think about doing a hackathon.
Sure.
No guys are doing that. The press guys are doing that. A lot of the other guys are doing one of the meetups is usually a hack night where they're getting together, just taking an idea and trying to hack it, see who can build a piece on it.
Would you guys be interested in doing something like that? Like taking.
Chris Weber does that. He and a group of people build a site for a local needy organization over the course of a hackathon.
That might be interesting.
That's a great idea.
Yeah.
Probably need more than 2 hours.
No, it would certainly be a different event.
Day long thing.
Yeah.
But even if everybody comes prepared and they say, okay, we're doing some issues in Drupal 8. Here's the issue queue. Here's a couple of we just need to run simply test me's on them, or we need to document something. That might be really awesomely helpful.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. That's a great idea. Yeah, totally. It'll be fun. Okay, cool.
Thank you. Okay, great. Anything else? Well, feel free to get some food. And for all of you online, we appreciate your attendance. And it'll be also available. I'll post the link on the Meetup site. Great.
Awesome.